The scream tore through the traffic like a siren that didn't belong to any ambulance. 1 second, my daughter was laughing, her soft, fragile laugh that always made me forget the oxygen tank strapped beside her seat, and the next, I saw Karen's silver sedan cut across the lane like a bullet. Tires shrieked. Horns blared. I remember the flash of her manicured hand gripping the wheel, the wild eyes behind her sunglasses. Then the crack, deafening, final. The world slowed into frames. My badge hit the pavement before I even knew I'd drawn my gun. Smoke hung in the air, turning sunlight into a dirty haze. My daughter's heart monitor was still beeping from the back seat, frantic, uneven, a sound that would haunt me for the rest of my life. "Lily!" I shouted, but her body slumped sideways, her pulse fading faster than the traffic around us. Karen stumbled out of her car, screaming about rules, about how I'd blocked the HOA exit, her words dripping with the same poison she'd thrown at us for months. Blood pooled beneath my little girl's armrest, bright against the asphalt. For a moment, everything went silent, no cars, no people, just my breath trembling as I pressed my hands against her chest, whispering, "Stay with me, baby, stay with me." When the paramedics finally arrived, Karen was still yelling at the officers, claiming self-defense, claiming fear. I caught my reflection in her window, uniform stained red, eyes cold. She didn't know who she'd just crossed. I wasn't just another father in her neighborhood. I was the chief detective of this county. And I was going to make sure she never hurt anyone again. We moved into Maplewood Estates the summer Lily turned 11, a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood with white fences, trimmed hedges, and neighbors who waved but never lingered. After years of night shifts and crime scenes, I wanted stillness. I wanted my daughter to wake up to birds instead of sirens. She'd been born with a congenital heart defect, her chest marked by a thin scar she used to call her war line. Doctors warned she shouldn't overexert herself, but Lily never listened. She lived as if each sunrise was proof that she'd won again. Our house sat on the corner lot, the one with the big oak tree and the tire swing she begged me to hang. My wife, Jenna, painted the mailbox a bright sky blue, a little rebellion in a street of identical beige. On weekends, I grilled in the backyard while Lily sketched clouds on her notepad, giving them names like Sleepy Marshmallow and Racing Ghost. For a while, it felt perfect, the kind of peace I thought only existed in other people's stories. That was before Karen. She introduced herself the day our moving truck blocked part of the cul-de-sac. "You can't park there," she said, smiling tight enough to crack glass. She wore a floral blouse and carried a clipboard, the universal badge of HOA command. "I'm the community liaison. Just making sure everyone abides by the neighborhood standards." I remember thinking she meant well, a woman who cared too much about order. But there was something in her tone, the way her eyes lingered on the wheelchair ramp by our porch. Like she was taking notes. Over the next few weeks, Karen's friendliness turned into a routine inspection. Notes appeared on our door: "Your trash bins are visible from the street. Grass exceeds HOA height regulation. Ramp color not pre-approved." At first, I laughed it off. But every message carried the same subtle threat, that we didn't quite belong. Still, I tried to be neighborly. I waved, fixed the bins, even attended one of her infamous HOA meetings in the clubhouse. It was fluorescent lit and silent except for Karen's voice echoing through the room. "We have rules for a reason," she said, tapping her papers like a judge. "This community's beauty depends on compliance." Most nodded. A few rolled their eyes. But when she caught mine, she smiled again, that same brittle, performative smile, and said, "I'm glad to see you here, detective." That night, Jenna whispered, "She's watching us." I wanted to believe she was exaggerating. But soon, I'd notice Karen's car idling across from our driveway in the evenings, her phone angled toward our house. She called it monitoring. I called it stalking. Looking back, I should have known peace never lasts long where control and ego live side by side. Maplewood wasn't just a neighborhood. It was a stage, and Karen was the self-appointed director. And she had just found her next story to ruin. Karen's resentment didn't explode overnight, it simmered, like a slow leak in a tire you don't notice until the steering starts to pull. It began with her tone. Gone was the fake politeness, in its place came a sharp edge hidden behind community concern. "You know, detective," she'd say, standing on her porch with that clipboard like it was a badge, "the HOA's been getting complaints about your driveway. Oil stains aren't exactly welcoming." Her voice carried across the cul-de-sac, just loud enough for the other neighbors to peek through their blinds. I cleaned the driveway that night, not for her, for Lily. She was proud of her home, proud that her dad wore a badge, even if that badge came with shadows. But Karen wasn't satisfied. The next week, she claimed our mailbox color violated the aesthetic code. Then it was our ramp again, too wide, she said, and painted in an unapproved shade. I bit my tongue, but Jenna didn't. "It's a ramp for a child with a heart condition, not a fashion statement," she snapped. Karen's smile froze, thin as glass. "Rules are rules, Mrs. Hale," she said, tapping her pen. "We all have to follow them. Even special cases." That phrase, special cases, burned. From that day on, she stopped hiding it. Every minor thing became an offense. Lily's bike leaning against the porch? Violation. The wind chime that calmed her before surgery? Noise complaint. The neighborhood group chat that once shared recipes now buzzed with Karen's accusations. "Some people think they're above standards. Certain families are drawing too much attention." Soon, the isolation set in. Neighbors who used to wave now crossed the street. A few still whispered sympathy, but none dared speak against her, not when she chaired every vote and monitored every lawn. One evening, as I came home from a late shift, I caught her standing by our fence with her flashlight, pointing it at the side of our house like an investigator. "Just checking for unauthorized extensions," she said, not even flinching when I stepped closer. "Karen," I warned, my voice steady but low, "you're crossing lines." She leaned in, that smug grin twisting across her face. Funny, coming from a man who makes a living doing that. That's when I knew, this wasn't about rules anymore. It was about control, about power. She needed someone to dominate, and we'd become her project. The next morning, Lily's wheelchair tires were slashed. Karen stood at the end of the driveway, pretending to water her flowers. She didn't even look at me when she said, "Maybe if people respected the neighborhood, bad things wouldn't happen." I stepped closer, jaw tight, voice trembling. "If you ever come near my daughter again," she raised her hand, cutting me off with a smirk. "Careful, detective. Threats don't sound good on police reports." Her meaning was clear. She wasn't just playing HOA president anymore. She was declaring war. It started raining the week Karen took her harassment to the next level, the kind of steady, cold drizzle that made everything feel smaller, heavier. Each morning, I'd open the door to find another envelope taped to the glass. Violation notice. Fine imposed. Urgent HOA action required. Her handwriting was neat, deliberate, the kind of script that made cruelty look civilized. The first was for excessive decorative lighting, Lily's small string of pastel heart lights around her window. The next, for improperly stored medical equipment, referring to the oxygen tank she needed by her bed. By the fifth notice, I stopped reading them and started stacking them in a drawer, each one a reminder that reason didn't work with people like her. Rain soaked the ink of the latest letter as I ripped it open on the porch. Final warning before legal action. I could almost hear Karen's voice between the lines, smug, self-righteous, certain she was untouchable. Across the street, she stood under her umbrella, pretending to chat with another neighbor while her eyes never left me. When our gazes met, she smiled faintly, like she'd already won something I hadn't realized I was fighting for. The fines began arriving by mail next. Hundreds of dollars for non-compliance. The HOA board, all hand-picked by Karen, voted unanimously. My appeals vanished into silence. Jenna begged me to let it go. "You can't fight a woman like that," she whispered one night, folding another letter before I could read it. "She doesn't stop until she ruins you." Lily, sensing the tension, tried to make light of it. "Maybe she just needs a friend, Dad," she said, drawing hearts on the edge of a violation notice. I forced a smile, but inside, I knew Karen didn't want friendship, she wanted obedience. She wasn't just after our property value. She was after our peace. Soon, the whispers started. Neighbors we'd once shared barbecues with now looked away. Someone spread rumors that I'd used my position to intimidate Karen. One even accused me of unauthorized siren testing in the neighborhood, a lie so absurd I almost laughed. Until an internal affairs officer called me in for a chat. Karen had filed a formal complaint against me, claiming I'd brandished my weapon during a civilian disagreement. That night, when I got home, there was chalk on the sidewalk in front of our house, childish handwriting, but the words were too cruel to come from kids. "Cops don't belong here. Murderer." Lily saw it before I could stop her. She didn't cry. She just looked at me with those quiet, knowing eyes, and said, "She's winning, isn't she?" I couldn't answer. One evening, as thunder rolled across the neighborhood, I found our mailbox open, papers scattered in the mud. The latest HOA letter fluttered against the curb, soaked and wrinkled. I picked it up, the ink bleeding into the words, "You have 30 days to vacate the property for continued violations." From across the street, Karen's curtains shifted. A silhouette moved, her. Watching. Always watching. I stood there in the rain, gripping that ruined piece of paper, feeling the storm above and the one inside me merge into the same thing, cold, relentless, and impossible to ignore. That was the moment I realized something had to break. And if it wasn't her rules, it was going to be her peace. It happened on a Saturday morning that looked too peaceful for what it was about to hold. The sun was out, the air crisp, the kind of suburban calm that makes you forget how fragile peace really is. Lily had her cardiology checkup downtown, so I loaded her wheelchair into the trunk, double-checking the oxygen cylinder, the monitor, the small pink blanket she never left home without. She sat in the back seat, humming along to the radio, tapping her fingers to the beat. "You think Dr. Evans will finally clear me for gym class?" she asked, her voice small but hopeful. I smiled through the rearview mirror. "If charm counts as cardio, you're already a champion." We turned onto Maplewood Avenue, the main exit from our HOA. That's when I saw her. Karen. Standing at the intersection, arms crossed, blocking the road with her car angled sideways across the exit lane. I slowed, thinking maybe she was talking to someone, maybe another one of her patrols. But as I got closer, she stepped forward, palms out, waving me down like she was conducting a traffic stop. "Karen, move your car," I said through the open window, trying to keep my voice calm. She walked right up to the hood, clipboard in hand. "You can't leave the subdivision until your violations are cleared," she said flatly, as if she were reading from scripture. "This road is HOA property, and I have the right to enforce." "Karen," I interrupted, "this isn't a game. My daughter has a heart appointment. Move the car." Lily's small voice came from behind me, soft and trembling. "Dad, my monitor's beeping faster." That sound, that faint, irregular beep, flipped a switch inside me. I stepped out of the car, rain still glistening on the asphalt from last night's storm. "I'm asking you one last time," I said, my badge visible on my belt. "Move it." She scoffed, took a step closer. "You think that badge means you're above the rules? You've been a disgrace to this community since day one. Maybe you should learn what real accountability looks like." I felt my jaw tighten. Karen, she's sick, then maybe she shouldn't live in a neighborhood with standards, she snapped. The words hit like a slap. I could feel my pulse roaring in my ears. Before I could speak, Lily's monitor let out a sharp alarm, the high-pitched warning tone that meant her oxygen was dipping. I turned toward the car, and that's when I saw Karen's hand. The flash of metal. She'd pulled a handgun from her glove compartment. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted, instinctively reaching for my sidearm but stopping short. Civilians. Witnesses. I couldn't risk escalation, not with Lily watching. "This is private property," she screamed, voice cracking with hysteria. "You can't threaten me here." The gun trembled in her hands. I raised mine, palms open. "Karen, listen to me, no one's threatening you. Put the weapon down." But she wasn't listening. Her eyes darted past me, to Lily. For one split second, time froze. The wind caught her hair. My boots scraped the wet pavement. Lily's face, pale, scared, confused, stared out from the back seat. Then, a deafening crack split the air. Glass shattered. Lily screamed. I ran, I don't even remember my feet hitting the ground, wrenched open the car door, and saw her clutching her stomach, blood spreading fast through her white sweater. The monitor screamed in warning as her small hands trembled. "No, no, stay with me, baby," I shouted, pressing down on the wound, feeling the warmth of her blood seeping through my fingers. "Jenna. Call 911. Karen dropped the gun, backing up, stammering, "I didn't mean to." "I didn't," he scared me. Sirens began to echo from somewhere far away, faint but growing. Neighbors poured out of their houses, faces pale, phones out, recording. Karen's hands shook, her mascara running in streaks. I looked at her, the woman who'd spent months tormenting my family, and in that moment, I didn't see power or control. I saw fear. I saw a coward who'd finally gone too far. As the paramedics rushed in and lifted Lily's limp body from my arms, I caught a glimpse of Karen being led away in handcuffs, still screaming about rules, about order, about how she was the victim. But all I could hear was the last weak beep of Lily's monitor fading into silence. That was the moment my heart stopped being a father's, and became something else entirely. Something cold. Something ready. For justice. The hospital smelled like bleach and heartbreak. I'd been in ERs 1,000 times before, as a detective, as a witness, as a man trained to keep emotion out of the room, but this was different. This time, the blood on my hands wasn't from a stranger. It was from my daughter. Lily lay in a sea of white sheets, her small chest rising in fragile, mechanical rhythm, every breath assisted by a machine that hummed louder than my thoughts. Electrodes clung to her skin like they were the only thing keeping her tethered to this world. I sat beside her, hands clasped, staring at the red pulse line on the monitor. The rhythmic blip that once comforted me now felt like mockery, steady one moment, faltering the next. Jenna stood behind the glass window, silent tears streaking her cheeks. The hallway outside buzzed with nurses and orderlies, the kind of quiet chaos that never stops but never helps. I'd spent my life protecting others. Yet now, I couldn't protect my own child from a woman with a clipboard and a grudge. When the officers arrived, I expected outrage, backup, support, justice. Instead, I got clipped tones and cold procedure. "We have to take both statements," one said, avoiding my eyes. Mrs. Kramer, Karen, claimed she was acting in self-defense. I laughed, a hollow, shaking sound. Self-defense? She blocked the road and shot a 12-year-old. She says you approached her aggressively, that you reached for your firearm first. I stared at them, speechless. My badge suddenly felt like a joke. I'd worn it for 20 years, built cases that put men behind bars, and now the same system was questioning me while she sat at home, spinning lies. Later that evening, as I stood by the vending machine waiting for Jenna's coffee, I overheard two nurses whispering, "That HOA woman? She's on the news already," said the officer scared her for months. The word stabbed deeper than the wound in my daughter's stomach. Karen was painting herself as the victim, calm, trembling voice, rehearsed tears, headlines twisting reality, local HOA leader traumatized after self-defense incident with police officer. I wanted to shout, to burn every channel that dared air it. But Lily's faint moan pulled me back. I went to her side, brushed her hair back gently. "You hang in there, sweetheart," I whispered. "Daddy's right here." Her fingers twitched, barely, like a response. And that's when it hit me, the silence between beeps, the weight of injustice pressing down. I couldn't fight this the usual way. The system was slow, cautious, political. But I'd seen how truth bends under the right kind of pressure. As the clock ticked past midnight, I made a quiet promise to myself, not the kind I'd write in a report, not the kind that follows policy. If the law couldn't bring Karen down, then I'd find another way. The anger that lived in me after the hospital began to harden into something sharper the way rain hardens into ice, slow, inevitable, and cold. I slept in shifts at Lily's bedside, watching the numbers on the monitor like a hawk, but my mind wasn't there. It was running glassy-eyed through memories and procedures, cataloging every moment from the intersection to the shot like evidence waiting to be dusted for prints. The spark came the night a kid on a bike, Ben from 2 doors down, the one who always delivered our Sunday papers, knocked on the ICU window with his helmet tipped back, breath fogging the glass. He'd seen something on his mom's porch camera after everyone left that day, a grainy clip of Karen's car idling, her stepping out, her hand moving to the glove compartment long before any argument. He'd assumed, like everyone else, that it was just another neighborhood drama. But he thought of Lily and brought the footage to me because his mom wouldn't let it go otherwise. When I watched it back in my rental car with the heater blasting, the air smelled like burnt coffee and old paper, and the clip clicked in my head like a lock finding its key. Karen's hand hovered over a small black object before she reached for my car. The motion was quick, practiced. It wasn't an accident. That same week, an unlikely ally appeared, Mrs. Patel, the HOA treasurer, who'd always been polite but distant. She slipped into the hospital chapel with a folder in her hand and a look that said she'd been carrying a weight too long. "You deserve to know," she told me, voice barely a whisper, and handed me minutes of closed-door HOA meetings where Karen had pushed for surveillance patrols and enforcement training. There were email chains praising her proactiveness, invoices for a private security detail she'd coordinated, and a ledger with a blank check signed in the HOA president's name, 20 grand missing the treasurer couldn't reconcile. Pieces clicked into a frame, a woman who'd built a power structure, who'd learned to weaponize neighbors and paperwork alike. I started pulling threads the way I used to when a homicide turned messy, subpoenas for camera footage, a quiet call to an old contact in IT to recover deleted files, a lunch with a bartender who'd overheard Karen talking about teaching stubborn people a lesson. Every step was surgical. There was no rage-fueled recklessness here, just the steady, cold work of someone who knew how to make truths stick. I rehearsed the narrative in my head, timelines, witness statements, motives, because the system required proof, not rage. But proof was only part of it. We needed to expose the machine she'd built, the HOA's complicity, the neighbor's silence, the false victim story on the local news. And in the quiet hours when the hospital hummed and Jenna slept in the waiting room with her face buried in her hands, I whispered to Lily's pale hand on the blanket and felt conviction settle in like armor. I wasn't going to wait for someone else to untangle the web Karen had spun. This time, I wouldn't wait for justice, I'd build it. I approached the investigation the same way I approached every homicide I'd ever worked, methodical, precise, leaving emotion at the door even when it kept pounding to be let back in. But this time, the victim wasn't just another case. She was my little girl. Every note I took, every file I opened, was personal. Ben's footage became my starting point. I enlarged the grainy frames until Karen's reflection in the windshield came into focus, a faint glint of metal in her right hand. A gun, visible before I'd even stepped out of my car. That was intent, not panic. I forwarded the video to an old friend in the department's digital forensics unit under a favor I didn't have the right to ask. Keep it off the record, I told him. Just enhance what you can. He didn't ask why. He'd seen the news, heard the spin. Everyone had. Meanwhile, Mrs. Patel helped me quietly dig through HOA archives. Most of the files had been lost or reorganized, but she'd been smart enough to make copies months earlier, sensing trouble. The emails we found were gold, Karen bragging about tightening control and ensuring problematic families understand compliance. There were even receipts for the security system she'd secretly installed around her own property, cameras angled toward mine. The pattern was obvious to me, a clear escalation of stalking behavior. I spent my nights at the hospital with my laptop open beside Lily's bed, piecing together a timeline that stretched back further than I'd realized. The first violation notice, the board meeting votes, the police report she'd filed claiming harassment, they all led to that morning at the intersection. It wasn't an impulsive act. It was the climax of a months-long obsession. Still, evidence without exposure meant nothing. The case was already tainted by her narrative, a terrified woman defending herself from a hostile officer. I needed more than proof, I needed a spotlight. So, I reached out to an old journalist contact from the Tribune, someone who still believed in truth over ratings. "You'll get your story," I told her, "but not until I have her cornered." That corner started forming faster than I expected. One evening, as I drove back from the hospital, I noticed a car following me, headlights steady, one lane behind. Karen's make and model. She was getting nervous, realizing the tide was turning. I turned left, then right, she followed both times. My pulse stayed steady, I'd lived in stakeouts long enough to know fear feeds the enemy. I pulled over outside the police station. She sped off. By the next morning, the enhanced footage came through, crystal clear. Karen opening her glove compartment, hand closing around the weapon, several seconds before I even exited my car. Intent, confirmed. It was all there. I stared at the screen, the flickering video reflecting off my eyes like firelight. For the first time since the shooting, my chest felt light. The narrative had finally cracked. I wasn't chasing justice anymore. Justice was starting to chase her. It started with a single email. One I'd been crafting for weeks, quiet, deliberate, impossible to ignore. Attached were screenshots of Karen's emails, HOA minutes, surveillance receipts, and most importantly, the enhanced video. I sent it to the local Tribune journalist, to the HOA board, and to the county's legal counsel all at once. Within hours, it spread like wildfire. By sunset, her smiling face, once the model of suburban grace, was plastered on every local channel, paired with the headline, HOA President's self-defense claim under fire after new footage emerges. The clip was damning. You could see her calmly opening her glove box, fingers brushing the handgun, long before any confrontation. It ran on repeat through the evening news, the image burned into every viewer's mind. The same neighbors who once crossed the street to avoid me now stood outside her house, whispering. The HOA emergency meeting was scheduled for that weekend, and I went, not as a detective, not even as a father, but as the man she'd underestimated. The room was packed. Folding chairs scraped the floor. Cameras from 2 news outlets sat in the back, red lights glowing. Karen arrived last, flanked by her 2 closest allies from the board, her face powdered pale, lips trembling in what she hoped passed for composure. She carried no clipboard this time, only a purse clutched like a shield. "Let's be clear," she began, voice thin, "this video is manipulated. It's a smear campaign orchestrated by me," I said, standing up. Every head turned. The man whose daughter is still in intensive care because you couldn't handle being told no. The room went still. You could hear the hum of the AC and the shuffle of a chair leg. Karen blinked, her throat tightening. That's not true. He threatened me. I stepped forward, holding up the HOA emails Mrs. Patel had given me. You called my family a liability to property values. You discussed setting an example for rule violators. You even billed the HOA for private surveillance to monitor my home. You didn't fear me, Karen. You hunted us. A murmur rippled through the room, disbelief, then anger. Neighbors who'd once looked away now glared at her openly. One man stood up, shaking his head. You lied to all of us, he said. You said he was dangerous. You said that kid, his voice broke. You said that little girl attacked you. Karen's mask slipped. The practiced sorrow vanished, replaced by raw panic. You don't understand, she stammered, voice cracking. He was going to ruin me. No, Karen, I said quietly, stepping closer. You ruined yourself. The HOA president called for order, but it was useless. Members shouted for her resignation, others demanded a full audit of her spending. The journalist caught it all, every trembling word, every angry outburst. The next morning, the clip went viral under the caption, HOA tyrant exposed by the father she shot. By nightfall, Karen's world had collapsed. Her board position revoked, her neighbors avoiding her like a disease, her front yard filled with reporters. The same rules she'd used to control everyone else were now being turned against her. For the first time in months, the neighborhood felt different. People smiled at me again, not out of pity, but out of respect. And though my heart still ached every time I walked into that hospital room, I finally knew one thing for sure, the truth had finally found its voice. The courthouse smelled faintly of dust and coffee, that sterile scent of bureaucracy that always meant one thing, Judgment Day. I'd walked through those doors hundreds of times before, but never like this. Never as a father whose child lay scarred from another's arrogance. The courtroom was small, crowded, humming with the low murmur of neighbors who'd come to see the downfall of the woman who once ruled their lawns like a kingdom. Reporters filled the back rows. Cameras waited. Every eye followed her when the bailiff opened the side door. Karen stepped in wearing beige, soft, harmless, deliberate. Her hair perfectly curled, her expression fragile enough to break under sympathy. But her eyes still held that flicker of defiance, the same gleam she'd used to control people, to make them doubt themselves. For months, she'd lived in a world built on her lies. Today, it was my job to burn that world down. The prosecutor laid the evidence out like a surgeon, calm, clean, fatal. The enhanced video played on the monitor, frame by frame, Karen's hand reaching for the gun, her calm before the chaos. The jurors leaned forward, faces tightening. The reporter's pen scratched furiously. Karen avoided my eyes, her jaw trembling when the sound of the gunshot echoed through the speakers. Lily's faint scream followed, small, distant, heartbreaking. When it was my turn to testify, the courtroom went silent. I stood at the witness stand, palms slick but steady. I've seen monsters before, I said, my voice carrying across the room. But they usually know what they are. This one didn't. She called it rules. She called it order. But what she really wanted was power, power over anyone who didn't bow to her. Karen snapped, slamming her hand on the table. You think you're some kind of hero? You humiliated me. You turned everyone against me. The judge's gavel struck hard. Ms. Kramer, control yourself. But it was too late, the mask had cracked. Her calm composure vanished, replaced by the wildness I'd seen that morning. He threatened me, she screamed. He scared me. That's why I shot a 12-year-old? I interrupted quietly. That's why you pulled the trigger before I even opened my car door. The silence that followed was electric. Even her lawyer looked down, defeated. The prosecutor didn't need to say much after that. He replayed the footage once more, slow motion this time, Karen's hand moving, my daughter's face visible in the reflection of the glass. The jurors didn't look at the screen. They looked at Karen. And in their eyes, I saw what I'd been waiting for, recognition. Not just of guilt, but of the human cost behind it. When the verdict came, it was quick. Guilty on all counts. Reckless endangerment. Assault with a deadly weapon. Attempted manslaughter. The words rolled out in order, cold and final. Karen collapsed into her chair, whispering, "It wasn't supposed to end like this." I stood still, my hand gripping the edge of the bench. The anger I'd carried for months didn't vanish. It just quieted. Like a storm finally leaving but refusing to let the air clear completely. After court, as the deputies escorted her away, she turned once, just once, her lips trembling. "You ruined me," she said, almost childlike. "No," I told her. "You did that the moment you aimed a gun at a little girl." The flash from the cameras outside stung my eyes, but the sound that followed cut through everything, Lily's laugh. She was there, in a wheelchair, pale but smiling, wrapped in Jenna's arms. The doctors had warned her recovery would take time, maybe years, but she'd made it through the worst. She reached out for me, her small fingers brushing mine. "Did we win, Daddy?" she asked. I knelt beside her, my throat too tight to speak. "We did, sweetheart. We did." As Karen's police van turned the corner, the reporters shouted questions, neighbors clapped, and the courthouse bell rang its dull metallic note. I didn't feel triumph. Just relief, deep, trembling relief that the nightmare had finally ended. But deep down, I knew something else too. Justice isn't clean. It doesn't erase scars or rewrite pain. It just balances the weight, so the innocent can finally breathe again. And for the first time in months, as the autumn wind lifted through the courthouse steps, I let myself breathe. The weeks that followed the trial felt like someone had finally turned the volume down on our lives. The noise, the flashing lights, the endless questions, all faded into a muted, heavy quiet. Karen's sentencing came swiftly, 8 years in state prison, with the judge noting her gross negligence and obsession with authority. It should have felt like victory, but it didn't. Justice, when you finally hold it in your hands, is heavier than you imagine. The neighborhood changed almost overnight. The once perfect lawns looked different now, not because they'd grown wild, but because people had stopped caring about uniformity. The HOA disbanded within a month. Mrs. Patel took down the old community sign herself, the same one that used to boast, "Maplewood Estates, a place of harmony." I saw her crying as the letters came off, one by one. No one blamed her, we all just wanted to start over. Neighbors who'd once crossed the street to avoid me now lingered on their porches when I passed. They brought meals, offered help, mumbled apologies they didn't know how to phrase. Some even admitted they'd believed Karen's lies at first. "She had a way of sounding right," one man said, shaking his head. "Guess we all learned something about fear." Lily came home from the hospital a few weeks later, thinner but still smiling. The first thing she asked to see was the oak tree in our yard, the one with the swing I'd built before everything fell apart. I carried her out there one evening, the sunset painting the street gold, and for the first time in months, she laughed, a sound that filled every crack in my chest. Jenna leaned against me quietly, whispering, "You did it. You kept your promise." But in truth, the victory didn't feel like mine. It felt borrowed, like something the universe had allowed, but not freely. Every time I drove past that intersection, I saw the ghost of that day. I saw the line between justice and revenge, blurry and trembling. There were nights I replayed everything, wondering if I'd gone too far, if the line I'd crossed to get here had cost me more than I realized. Still, when I tucked Lily in at night and heard her heartbeat steady and strong, I knew I'd do it all again. Because peace doesn't come free, it's earned, paid for in sleepless nights, in broken trust, in the courage to stand against the people who weaponize power. Maplewood is quiet again now. No letters on doors, no whispering neighbors. Just wind through the oak branches and the faint creak of a swing moving back and forth. And though the street still remembers what happened here, it also remembers what survived. 6 months later, Maplewood looked nothing like the place that had once felt like a prison. The street that used to echo with Karen's complaints was now lined with laughter, kids riding bikes, sprinklers running, neighbors waving without fear of judgment. The HOA office stood empty, its glass door still bearing the faded outline of her old president nameplate. Someone had hung a basket of flowers there, wild daisies, untamed and bright, and for the first time, the neighborhood actually looked alive. We didn't move away. We thought about it, sure, but something in me refused to let her win by leaving. This was Lily's home, her swing, her street. It had taken everything from us, but it had also taught us something priceless, that peace isn't about where you live, but what you stand for when the world tries to take it away. Lily's recovery was slow, but steady. The doctors called her a miracle. Every scar told a story, every heartbeat a victory. Some mornings, I'd sit beside her under the oak tree, coffee in hand, listening to her describe the future she wanted, to study medicine, to help kids like her. She'd smile up at me and say, "You always said truth wins in the end, right?" And every time, I'd nod. Because she was living proof of it. Jenna started a small community group, not an HOA, just neighbors helping neighbors. They repaired fences together, planted a memorial garden at the end of the cul-de-sac. There's a stone there now, engraved with Lily's words, "Peace isn't quiet, it's courage." Every time I walk past it, I feel something shift inside me, like the weight of everything that happened is finally finding its place. Karen's name still surfaces sometimes, in news articles, in legal updates, but she's just a cautionary tale now, a shadow of the control she once had. People still debate what drives someone like her, pride, loneliness, fear, but I stopped trying to understand. Some storms aren't meant to be analyzed. They're meant to be survived. On the anniversary of that morning, I stood at the same intersection where everything changed. The air was still, the sky painted gold. The cracks in the asphalt had been filled, the stains long washed away. I closed my eyes and whispered the same words I'd said at Lily's bedside the night she woke up, "We made it." And as the sun broke through the clouds, I finally understood, justice had never been about punishment. It was about restoration. About rebuilding what hate tried to destroy. In a town once obsessed with rules, it was mercy that rewrote them.